You think you're untouchable, he spat. I've seen to it that without my support, you'll be ruined. Every connection, every friend you think you have in this city, they belong to me. And if you walk away, I'll make sure you lose everything. The night was unusually cold as Jane hurried through the empty streets, trying to ignore the piercing wind that whipped her face. All she could think of was getting home to her mother, Emily, who lay in bed struggling with a chronic illness. Jane had just turned 19, but life had dealt her more hardship than most. Every penny she earned was spent on keeping her mother comfortable, leaving little room for dreams or luxuries. As she cut through a narrow alley, a faint groan broke the silence. Startled, she looked around, and there, barely visible in the shadow of the building, was a man lying unconscious on the ground. His face was pale, and he clutched his chest as if in pain. She hurried to his side, her heart racing. The man looked out of place, dressed in a finely tailored suit, with a watch that probably cost more than her yearly earnings. "Sir?" Jane whispered, shaking him gently. The man stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "Help," he muttered, his voice weak. Without hesitation, Jane helped him up, supporting his weight with her slender frame. She knew her mother was the only one who could offer any help. Emily had once been a nurse and still had some medical supplies and knowledge. When they reached her small rundown apartment, Jane called out for her mother. Emily took one look at the man and snapped into action, treating his wound with a firm, practiced touch. Hours later, he finally stabilized, and they both breathed a sigh of relief. The next morning, Jane was stunned to find their mysterious guest awake and alert, studying her with piercing, icy blue eyes. The man introduced himself as Damien Winthrop, the only son and heir of Lucien Winthrop, one of the wealthiest men in the country. Jane couldn't believe her ears. She had read about the Winthrops in the papers, but never imagined meeting one. Yet here he was, leaning against her kitchen table as though he were any other man. As days passed, Damien stayed with them, unable to return to his life due to threats that put him in danger. Jane's curiosity grew. Damien was unlike any rich man she had imagined. He was aloof, carrying a sadness in his eyes. Yet as the days went on, she saw glimpses of vulnerability that made her heart soften. For Damien, the kindness shown by Jane and Emily touched something deep within him. He had lived his entire life in a world where people valued him only for his wealth. But here, in this humble home, he found himself treated with genuine care and warmth. He watched as Jane worked tirelessly to support her mother, sacrificing her own dreams without a second thought. Against his own better judgment, he found himself drawn to her, and his heart ached for her struggles. One evening, as they sat together in the dimly lit kitchen, Damien broke the silence. "Why don't you dream bigger, Jane? You deserve so much more than this." Jane glanced away, her cheeks flushed. "Dreams don't put food on the table," she replied softly. "Besides, people like me don't get miracles." Damien's eyes darkened. He didn't believe in miracles either, but for Jane's sake, he wished he could make one happen. When Damien finally left their home, Jane felt a pang of loss, but she pushed it aside, reminding herself that men like him didn't belong in her world. Days passed, and she resigned herself to life as it was. However, she had no idea what was to come. A few weeks later, a black car pulled up outside their apartment. Jane answered the door to find a team of lawyers and assistants waiting, each dressed in sharp suits. One of them handed her an ornate invitation, inviting her to a charity gala, hosted by none other than Lucien Winthrop himself. Shocked, she read the note that accompanied the invitation. "Jane, thank you for saving my son. I'd be honored to meet the woman who gave him back his life." With her mother's encouragement, Jane attended the event. She stepped into a world she had only seen in movies: grand chandeliers, champagne glasses, and people draped in designer clothes. The sight was overwhelming, and she felt utterly out of place. Then she saw Damien. He approached her, looking more polished than ever, but there was a warmth in his eyes she hadn't seen before. "I'm glad you came," he whispered, his hand lightly touching hers. They spent the evening talking, but Jane sensed something dark lurking beneath the glittering surface of Damien's world. As they moved through the crowd, Jane overheard whispers, catching bits of conversation that hinted at family feuds and betrayal. Later that night, Damien confessed to her the truth. His family was divided. His father, Lucien, had always been a cold and controlling figure. The reason Damien had been in danger that night was that he was being targeted by a rival faction within his own family. There were people who wanted him out of the picture to seize his inheritance. Seeing her shock, Damien took her hand, his voice breaking. "Jane, I've lived my whole life in a gilded cage, but meeting you, it made me see that there's more to life than money. I don't want to lose you." Jane's heart raced as he pulled her close, confessing feelings he could barely understand himself. But before they could speak further, a shadow fell over them. Lucien himself had overheard Damien's confession, his face twisted in anger. He threatened Jane, making it clear that she had no place in their world and warning her to stay away from his son. Despite the threats, Jane and Damien couldn't stay apart. They began meeting in secret, stolen moments that grew into a passionate love neither of them could deny. But their happiness was short-lived. Lucien was relentless, cutting off Damien's finances, isolating him, and even threatening Jane's mother to force them apart. In a final act of defiance, Damien proposed to Jane, vowing to leave everything behind for a life with her. But just as they prepared to run away, tragedy struck. Damien was involved in a suspicious car accident, barely surviving. Lucien took advantage of the situation, offering Jane a terrible choice. If she truly loved Damien, she would leave and never see him again, for his safety. Heartbroken, Jane made the hardest decision of her life, walking away from Damien to protect him. She returned to her quiet life with Emily, haunted by memories of the man she loved. Months later, she received an anonymous letter, a single sentence that reignited her hope. "You saved me once, Jane. I'm coming back for you." Days turned into weeks and then months, yet Jane heard nothing more from Damien. The letter had given her hope, but as time passed, doubts began to creep in. She tried to focus on her mother, Emily, who seemed to be getting weaker, and on her work, which barely kept them afloat. But the memory of Damien lingered, haunting her like a bittersweet melody. Then one evening, as Jane was closing up the small diner where she worked, a familiar black car pulled up outside. Her heart skipped a beat as she watched a tall figure step out, hidden under a wide-brimmed hat and long coat. The figure moved toward her, and as he drew closer, she recognized those piercing blue eyes. "Damien," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took off his hat, revealing a tired but determined expression. "Jane," he breathed, as if seeing her was the only thing keeping him alive. Overwhelmed, she ran into his arms, her emotions too powerful to contain. They stood there in silence, wrapped in each other's embrace, until Damien gently pulled back to look at her. "I told you I'd come back," he said, his voice filled with conviction. They spent the night talking, with Damien explaining everything that had happened since they'd last seen each other. He had spent months recovering from his injuries, cut off from his father's empire and left to fend for himself. Lucien had done everything in his power to erase Damien from the family's legacy, but Damien had fought back, determined to claim not just his inheritance, but also his freedom. With each word, Jane could see the fire in Damien's eyes, a resilience she hadn't known he possessed. But the weight of his struggle became clear when he revealed his plan. "Jane," he said, taking her hands in his, "I can't go back to my old life without you. But there's one thing I have to do first." He paused, searching her face. "I need to confront my father once and for all. I want him to understand that he can't control me or my life anymore." Jane felt a chill. Lucien Winthrop was not a man who let go easily. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "I'm certain," Damien replied. "I can't live in fear anymore. And once I'm free of him, I want us to be together. Forever." They shared a quiet moment, each understanding the risks ahead. But Jane's heart swelled with love and determination. She knew that if they were to have any chance at happiness, Damien needed to face his past. The next day, they set out for the Winthrop estate. Damien had arranged for a private meeting with Lucien, insisting Jane come with him. As they entered the grand mansion, memories of that first gala flashed through Jane's mind. The opulence, the power, and the feeling of being an outsider. But now she felt different. She was here not as a stranger, but as Damien's partner, ready to stand by his side. Lucien greeted them with a cold, calculating gaze. He didn't look pleased to see Jane, but he kept his composure, his expression unreadable. Damien, I didn't think you'd have the nerve to come back, he sneered, glancing briefly at Jane. And you brought her. How charming. Damien stepped forward, his voice steady. I came to tell you that I'm done living under your shadow. You may have given me life, but you don't own it. I'm taking control of my future. Without you. Lucien's eyes narrowed, his face twisting with anger. You think you can just walk away? You're a Winthrop. You have responsibilities, and I won't allow you to throw them away. He looked at Jane with disdain. This girl. She's the only real thing I've ever had in my life, Damien shot back. And I'd choose her over every dollar you've ever made. Lucien's anger boiled over, and he revealed a chilling plan. You think you're untouchable, he spat. I've seen to it that without my support, you'll be ruined. Every connection, every friend you think you have in this city, they belong to me. And if you walk away, I'll make sure you lose everything. Jane's heart sank, but Damien met his father's gaze with unwavering strength. You can take everything from me, he said quietly, but you'll never take my freedom, and you'll never understand what it means to truly love. With that, Damien took Jane's hand and led her out of the mansion. They had left behind a world of power and control, but they had also found something far more valuable, a future that they could build together, free from Lucien's chains. The following months were tough. Damien struggled to rebuild his life from scratch, starting a new business with the limited resources he had. But Jane was by his side, working tirelessly and encouraging him at every step. Their love grew stronger with each challenge they faced, becoming the foundation of their new life. One day, while working late into the night, Damien received a mysterious message. It was from one of his father's former associates, a man named Charles who had secretly supported Damien's defiance. Charles revealed that Lucien had passed away unexpectedly and that Damien had inherited his father's vast estate. Damien was stunned. The power and wealth he had fought so hard to escape was now his, left as a bitter reminder of his father's control. He knew that accepting the inheritance would bring him back into the world he despised. Yet rejecting it would mean letting his father's empire fall into the hands of those who only wanted to exploit it. After a long conversation with Jane, Damien made his decision. He would take control of the Winthrop legacy, but he would use it for a new purpose. Together they founded a charitable foundation in Lucien's name, using the wealth to uplift underprivileged communities and support people like Jane, who had been overlooked and left behind. Years later, as they stood on the stage of a charity gala, a different one from the world they'd once known, they looked at each other with pride. They had built a new legacy, not one of power and control, but of kindness and hope. And as Damien looked into Jane's eyes, he knew he had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life. Not freedom, not wealth, but a love that was worth everything. If you love this story of courage, redemption, and the power of true love, don't forget to like and subscribe for more captivating tales. Share this video with someone who believes in second chances, and let us know in the comments, what would you do if you found yourself in Jane's shoes? Stay tuned for more heart-stirring stories that remind us love can conquer all obstacles.